As the U.S. proxy war against Russia and Ukraine continues, and as the U.S. ratchets up tension in Asia Pacific against China, it is working on escalating yet another conflict in the Middle East. I'm sure many people are following this conflict. It began with an Israeli military operation being carried out against the Palestinian people in Gaza, and it has escalated from there outward across the entire region. This was very predictable. The U.S. regularly uses Israel as a means of provoking its enemies and dragging them into war. This is stated policy in U.S. government and corporate funded think tanks. I wrote an article about this. It is here in New Eastern Outlook. It is published on the 16th of January. U.S.-British attacks on Yemen, a portent for wider war. And this was after the first strikes across Yemen, and this has now been followed by several more strikes. I'm going to read this article. I'm going to add in some additional information, including some recent developments that more or less back up the premise that I laid out in this article. So I will begin. In the opening weeks of 2024, the U.S. and British unilaterally launched several large-scale missile and airstrikes on targets in territory held by Ansar Allah, referred to as the Houthis across the Western media in Yemen. I will be referring to them as Ansar Allah. The strikes follow a campaign of missile strikes and boardings conducted by Ansar Allah against commercial shipping destined to and from Israel in response to Israel's ongoing punitive operations in Gaza. And I call them punitive operations. It's very clear they have no interest in eliminating Hamas. At the very beginning, the spokesman for the Israeli Defense Forces said that they would focus on maximizing damage, not on precision, not on accuracy. This means they're trying to maximize the death and destruction across all of Gaza, not just against targets associated with Hamas. While the stated purpose of the U.S.-British strikes are to protect commercial shipping, hostility of any kind in the Red Sea is likely to prompt international shipping companies to continue seeking out and using alternative routes until fighting of any kind subsides. And this is just common sense. If there is a military conflict taking place and it's affecting any particular waterway, international shipping companies will avoid it. Even if the whole U.S. Navy is there promising protection, there is a risk. The risk is not worth it. They will take another route. We have this from Euronews. Euronews Business, Red Sea trade route still months away from safety, says Maersk boss. So this was an article that I included in this article that I wrote. It says, indeed, according to Euronews Business, despite the U.S.-British strikes on Ansar Allah, the CEO of Maersk, responsible for 1/5 of global maritime shipping, believes safely transiting the Red Sea is still months away. And so no matter what developments take place between the U.S., the British, other members of this coalition against Ansar Allah or any other actor in the region, as long as there's fighting, this route through the Red Sea will not be attractive to international shipping. They are anticipating months of conflict before it is safe to transit the Red Sea again. Despite the political posturing that accompanied these attacks, strategically they will do very little to impact Ansar Allah's fighting capacity. The political movement possesses a formidable military organization that has weathered years of full-scale war waged against it by a Saudi-led Arab coalition, backed in turn by both the US and UK. And this conflict has been going on for many years. Very intense fighting. It had produced the worst humanitarian crisis on earth. That was according to the UN. Not only did the US and UK encourage Saudi Arabia to sustain an air and ground war against Yemen, both Western nations contributed directly to Saudi Arabia's war efforts. People have to remember, not only did Saudi Arabia and its coalition partners bomb Yemen for many years, they also initiated a ground offensive into Yemen. This included the use of main battle tanks, artillery, ground forces in general. The New York Times, in a 2018 article titled right here. Army Special Forces secretly help Saudis combat threat from Yemen rebels. This was from May 2018. This article admitted that U.S. Special Forces were operating at a minimum along the Saudi-Yemeni border, assisting Saudi Arabia's armed forces in choosing targets. This very same article admits that the U.S. was also lending assistance related to aircraft refueling, logistics, and general intelligence sharing. This is something that the U.S. does as it wages proxy war around the globe. It is currently doing something very similar in Ukraine, for example. There's also this article that I mentioned in this piece. This is from The Guardian. This is from 2019. The Saudis couldn't do it without us. The UK's true role in Yemen's deadly war. So it's not just the US, it is also the UK. This article admitted to the scope of support provided by the UK to Saudi Arabia in its war on Yemen. It included supplying weapons and munitions, thousands of maintenance contractors on the ground in Saudi Arabia, pilot training, and even sending British troops to fight alongside Saudi soldiers inside Yemen itself. The scale of both Saudi Arabia's war on Yemen and the scale of US and British assistance to Saudi Arabia, including through the use of thousands of contractors and hundreds of soldiers on the ground, dwarfs the current missile and airstrikes conducted by the US and British from the Red Sea. Even if the US and British significantly expanded their current missile and airstrike campaign, it would still pale in comparison to the war that has been waged against Yemen in recent years. So clearly, the US plan to throw missiles, drop bombs on Yemen is not going to impact Ansar Allah's military capacity, their fighting capacity. This is only going to escalate tensions in the region. It is not going to stop Ansar Allah from its interdiction operations. And after I wrote this article, actually very recently, this is from January 19th, this is from the BBC, Biden says U.S. strikes on Houthis in Yemen have not stopped Red Sea attacks. So who could have predicted that? The article says Houthi forces launched a new missile attack on a U.S.-owned vessel on Thursday after President Joe Biden said American strikes have not deterred the militants' campaign in the Red Sea. The Pentagon said no damage or injuries were reported after Houthis fired 2 missiles at the MV Chem Ranger. The attack followed a 5th round of U.S. strikes in Yemen earlier. So when I wrote this article for New Eastern Outlook, it was after the 1st round of attacks. Now we're up to at least 5 rounds of attacks, possibly more by the time this video is posted publicly. The White House said U.S. forces took out a range of Houthi missiles that were to be fired toward the Red Sea. Speaking after the U.S. strikes, Mr. Biden was asked by reporters in Washington, D.C. if the attacks on Houthi targets were working. Well, when you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No, he said. Are they going to continue? Yes. So let's continue with my New Eastern Outlook article. Having considered that update, I write, clearly then, the current U.S.-British strikes on Yemen hold little prospect of deterring Ansar Allah. So why is the U.S. and British carrying out these strikes anyway? Clearly, despite additional attacks, even the U.S. is admitting this is not going to stop Ansar Allah. So what are Washington's true motives in attacking Yemen? I continue. I cite a CNN article titled U.S. and UK carry out strikes against Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen. It is this article here. This was from January 12th, 2024. For weeks, the U.S. had sought to avoid direct strikes on Yemen because of the risk of escalation in the region already simmering with tension as the Israel-Hamas war continues, but ongoing Houthi attacks on international shipping compelled the coalition to act. Yet, because the strikes only ensure shipping in the Red Sea remains obstructed, and because the strikes themselves have little hope of impacting Ansar Allah strategically, the only other explanation as to why the U.S. launched them was to specifically raise the risk of escalation in the region. And this is what I have been saying all along. The U.S. is not there trying to persuade Israel to limit its operations. The U.S. is not there to try to restore the safe transit of maritime shipping through the Red Sea. It is not there to ensure peace and stability in Iraq or in Syria or anywhere else in the region. It is there to escalate as much as possible. It wants to drag the entire region into war so that it can reassert itself over the region like it did in Europe. This is exactly what it's trying to do in the Middle East now. Ansar Allah's ally, Iran, has been the target of US-sponsored regime change operations for decades. Entire policy papers have been written by US government and corporate-funded think tanks, including the Brookings Institution and its 2009 paper, Which Path to Persia, which I have gone over many, many times, and I'm going to go over it again, detailing options to achieve regime change, including through deliberate attempts to draw Iran into a war by both covert action within Iran and through attacks on Iran's network of regional allies. And that is exactly what we are watching take place in the Middle East right now. The US is backing networks inside Iran to carry out attacks. The US and its allies in the region are carrying out attacks on Iran's allies across the region. And this is what the Brookings paper in 2009 admitted. It said, it would be far more preferable if the United States could cite an Iranian provocation as justification for airstrikes before launching them. Clearly, the more outrageous, the more deadly, and the more unprovoked the Iranian action, the better off the United States would be. Of course, it would be very difficult for the United States to go to Iran into such a provocation without the rest of the world recognizing this game, which would then undermine it. One method that would have some possibility of success would be to ratchet up covert regime change efforts in the hope that Tehran would retaliate overtly or even semi-overtly, which could then be portrayed as an unprovoked act of Iranian aggression. So we saw the US backing one of its terrorist organizations inside Iran to attack an anniversary of General Qasem Soleimani's death. There were gatherers at his tomb, and there was a bombing, and it killed a large number of people. This falls directly into that category. And of course, Iran did retaliate, and the US, the Western media in general, attempted to portray this as an act of Iranian aggression. The article continues. Preceding the US-British missile and airstrikes on Yemen, the US has carried out strikes on Iranian allies across the region, including in Syria and Iraq. Israel, with US backing, has also carried out attacks across the region on Iranian allies, specifically on Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. There was also recently a terrorist bombing inside of Iran, likely carried out by one of several terrorist organizations sponsored by the US to carry out just such attacks, as per the Brookings paper's own suggestion regarding ratcheting up covert regime change efforts inside Iran. Should be noted that elsewhere in the Brookings paper, the option of using known terrorist groups to carry out US-backed insurgency is afforded an entire chapter. It's chapter 7, inspiring an insurgency supporting Iranian minority and opposition groups. Together, this constitutes a strategy of attempting to degrade Iranian allies in the region ahead of a wider conflict, and as a means of provoking and thus drawing Iran itself into that wider conflict. So far, Iran has exhibited tremendous patience. Iran, as both Russia and China, who face similar US policies of encirclement and containment, knows time works in its favor. Iranian patience has already served Tehran well. It has afforded it the ability to diplomatically resolve tensions between itself and Saudi Arabia. This was done through Chinese mediation. It has also allowed Iran to continue building up not only its own military capabilities, but those across its network of allies in the region, leading to a gradual shift in the balance of power in Tehran's favor. And if you look at the Middle East today, the balance of power certainly is shifting in the direction of Tehran and its allies, Russia and China, and away from the United States. Washington realizes this time next year. If events continue to unfold as they have in recent years, Iran will only be stronger and the US more isolated in the region. The US faced a similar problem of waning primacy in Europe, using its proxy war in Ukraine against Russia as a means of reasserting itself over Europe. Washington likely imagines it can use a similar strategy to reassert itself over the Middle East, while using a regional conflict to collectively weaken and thus subordinate the nations therein. And this includes American adversaries in the region and also so-called American allies in the region. The US wants to weaken all of them, subordinate all of them, just like they're doing in Europe right now. Only time will tell if the US is as successful in the Middle East as it was in Europe. Already many factors are working against the US, but from Washington's perspective, it isn't paying the price for any of these conflicts. The regions these conflicts are fought in are paying that price. As long as Washington is absolved from any direct cost in such a foreign policy, it will continue pursuing it until it finally and is fully denied the means to continue doing so. And right before I began preparing this video, there was another missile attack on a US base, or at least US troops at an Iraqi base. This was Ansar Allah Air Base. There's Iraqi forces stationed there, but there's also a large US military presence there. This is via Reuters. This article here: US personnel suffer minor injuries in Iraq base attack US officials. This is January 21st, 2024. And we've seen these claims before where they say it's just minor injuries, and it turns out it's much more significant than that. The US just doesn't want to admit how vulnerable its troops are in the region. This is according to Reuters. The US Central Command said in a statement that the base was hit by multiple ballistic missiles, also rockets fired by Iranian-backed militants from inside Iraq. The statement did not confirm the extent of any US injuries, but said personnel were being evaluated for traumatic brain injury. So that's not minor injuries, that's a very serious injury. US missile defenses appear to have failed to stop these missiles. And in this Reuters article, it's very interesting. There's no mention of what type of air defenses or missile defenses the US was using. But we know from other articles that the US specifically at this base is using the Patriot air and missile defense system. This is from Defense News. This is from all the way back in 2020. Patriot missile defense system now active in Iraq, say US officials. New air defense systems are now protecting American and allied forces at military bases in Iraq, where troops have been attacked by Iranian-backed insurgents in recent months. Again, remember, this is 2020. According to US officials, Patriot missile launchers and 2 other short-range systems are now in place at Al Asad Air Base, so the same base that was just attacked recently, where Iran carried out a massive ballistic missile attack against US and coalition troops in January. And at the military base in Erbil, that was also attacked recently, by the way, said officials who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive weapons movements. And of course, this article from Defense News is talking about the bulking up of air and missile defenses around these bases following the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. And this was during the Trump administration, again, just to drive home the fact that it does not matter who is in the White House or who is controlling Congress at any given time. This is a singular foreign policy agenda that moves forward regardless. It's very important to understand that. So getting back to this recent Reuters article regarding this recent missile attack, it says, offering a sense of scale of the attack, Central Command said most of the missiles were intercepted, though others hit the base. And I've talked about this very often regarding air defenses, both Russian and Ukrainian air defenses in the Ukrainian conflict. When you launch an attack, you do not launch 2 or 3 missiles. You need to launch a large number of them to saturate and overwhelm air and missile defenses. This ensures that at least some of the missiles get through and cause the damage that you are trying to carry out on any specific target. And again, it's very interesting that Reuters avoids using the name Patriot in their article. And attacks like this are, just to put this in a wider context, attacks like this on US bases in the region are, first of all, are going to expend US Patriot missiles that are already facing a critical shortage worldwide. They're going to have to send more defenses to places like the Middle East where U.S. troops are, or they're going to have to abandon those positions. They're either going to have to send them to the Middle East, or they're going to have to send them to Ukraine, or they're going to have to send them to Asia Pacific, where the U.S. is trying to provoke a war with China. They cannot send them everywhere. They simply do not have enough, and they will never have enough. And this is a problem that has been ongoing since the US-backed Saudi war against Yemen. Again, years ago, the Patriot air and missile defense system was being stretched to its limits then. It failed to perform. Missiles and drones were getting through and causing damage. It created a shortage of Patriot missile interceptors even back then, and that is a shortage that has never been overcome. And that shortage has only been worsened by the conflict in Ukraine and now the widening of this conflict in the Middle East. And when you consider that, and you consider the state of the entire West's military industrial capacity, you see how strained and overstretched they are just in Ukraine alone. The position the US holds in the Middle East is unsustainable. It is untenable, just as their proxy war in Ukraine is, just as their growing confrontation with China is. When you put it all together, it is simply impossible. There is no way for them to sustain this. Even as we look at this and we analyze this and we conclude that this is unsustainable, they're just going to continue doing it anyway. This is exactly like what they were doing in the lead up to the conflict in Ukraine right now. I've gone over the 2019 Rand Corporation paper, which warned specifically against provoking Russia into a large-scale conflict in Ukraine, and yet US policymakers did it anyway. US hegemony cannot advance itself further, but the people driving this agenda are incapable of stopping it and withdrawing. As Alexander Mikuris of the Duran always says, they have no reverse gear. They're incapable of doing it. As empires all throughout history have demonstrated, it's much like a tropism, a force of nature. It cannot stop. It just continues mindlessly pushing forward until something gives. And I think the multipolar world realizes this. They understand that. They're trying to mitigate the damage that is being done in the meantime. And they're trying to create off-ramps, and they're trying to create contingencies so that as the US empire pushes forward and also falls apart, the rest of the world can pick up and move on once all of this runs its course. We don't know how much damage will be done in the process. We don't know how long it will take. We don't know how many conflicts the US will end up finding itself in. I was listening to Alex Christoforou quoting, I think it was a UK defense minister, imagining how the UK will be at war with multiple nations within a few short years. I will continue keeping an eye on the Middle East developments there, as I am continuing to watch the conflict in Ukraine, as well as US provocations here in Asia Pacific, where I am based. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I highly suggest you follow me on Telegram. Absolutely everything is posted there, including all of my videos, backups of all of my videos. You can turn them on, you can listen to them. If you're using your smartphone, you can even turn the screen off and the audio will continue playing, which is something you can't do, say, on YouTube unless you pay them. Also in the video description below are all of the links that I referenced in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of my social media platforms. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping, whether it's one-time donations month to month, or even if you're just sharing my work, getting the word out there, I appreciate all of that. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.